So, welcome back to Lead with Tech and the session on Learn with Chai. Uh, in continuation to our 5W strategy, we are going to today focus on how to apply the 5W strategy with respect to implementing uh, real world examples and real world projects. So, what we are going to do is understand a quick recap on 5W strategy, followed by how do we apply the um, learn about managing context in a project, in an organization or a team. How do you uh, manage the context across, right? And what are the different ways for you to ensure the context is updated based on every sprint, every detail, so that the prompts that the developers use is very effective and efficient. So the idea of today's session is to one, to understand how to manage context in a project, and second, in a project, team, or an enterprise, and on finally to look at how do you apply the 5W strategy to implement order management APIs in the project, right? So let's get started where we're going to talk about understand first. Let's understand the agenda. So today's session is split into 5 sections. Now, as I said, we're going to begin by understanding one of the ways to manage the context of your project, context of your team or organization, and how you can use it to build prompts and generate prompts for a project. Now, and then we understand the requirements of an order management service that we're going to build. And finally, we're going to recap on a quick recap on 5W strategy so that we are ready to apply the 5W strategy in our order management service implementation. And once we have all these details ready, we're going to quickly go back hands-on and implement basic APIs for order management, which will help you to understand various ways of applying 5W as well as generating the code where we will see that majority of the code is accepted and used in a project. So the first step is how do you manage the context, right? Now, again, if you joined our previous session, when we say context, the context could be of various layers. It could be a technical context where you're talking about coding standards, your company or a project specific technology stack or details around the project what you have, the technology stuff. And you also will have context around your enterprise. As an organization, what is the standards that your EA team has set? What is the standards your enterprise has with respect to building new APIs, building new UI? What are the UI components your enterprise uses? What are the third-party libraries from your NuGet packages that is allowed in your organization? So you can have everything as part of the enterprise context, technical, non-technical, user stories, definition of a user story, what should the user story contain. You can have everything as part of an enterprise context. Now, domain context is if you're in a based on the domain you are in, manufacturing, banking, e-commerce, online bank payment. So based on the context, there are some standards that domain has. So how do you bring those domain context so that the code, the services that you build is aligned to the industry standards. So, and finally, you will have some context specific to the story, specific to the sprint you're building, which will help you to get the clarity on the scope. So now with, with so many various contexts that are available, the question is how do you manage them, right? So what I'm going to show you now is one of the way to manage which works for most of the scenarios and which worked for me for some time now. And I wanted to show you that and see if we can apply that in a project tomorrow. So here I am opening my Visual Studio. Now I'm going to show today's demo with Microsoft Visual Studio and details, but the concept of managing the context can be applied across any Eclipse, any technology, including IDEs like Eclipse, PyCharm, and details. So So the way I would recommend to manage the context, right? So you have your project, any project structure that is defined by your technology or IDE. So what you're going to do is create a folder called context. Now it could be GHC context, it should be just a context file, prompt content, whatever name you want to give that where you're comfortable. Go and give a name and create a folder where you're going to manage the context. Now, what I would do is create specific context files, create a technical context file, right? Where I'm going to talk about everything from coding standards to technology stack, the technology stack of the company. What are the always use below NuGet packages for references. So I can give any context that is helpful, that will ensure the code is aligned to the standards of the company, team, or a project, and I can add the technical context of that particular project and the team. Similarly, I can have a detailed coding standards, which can be my existing coding standards document. I can take it out, put it up here so that GitHub Copilot can refer this and generate the code based on this. Now, it may not generate 100% aligned to this, but it will be closer to the standards if you follow this approach, right? So the idea is what are the standards that you want to define with respect to consistency, readability? How do you want it to be documented? What is error handling? Do you want every code to be wrapped inside a try catch block? Do you have custom error exceptions that you want it to follow, right? Or throw when in a particular scenario? What is the security conditions that you have? What is the performance? So, what is the logging requirement that you have? All of them can go into a context file, and that is something you as a team can manage on an ongoing basis, right? So the idea is, how do you define these coding standards? How do you define your technical context for the project? Now, in a typical scenario, technical context doesn't change often. It changes once in a sprint, and the coding standards, uh, it may not uh, undergo various changes often, but it will go under based on the feedbacks and based on the details. This is where you can bring in your Sonar Cube coding standards or other coding recommendations. And finally, I have a context file, which is a enterprise or a domain context. Now here you want to talk about, as an enterprise, what are the standards you have? As a domain, what are the customers you follow? So anything around domain and enterprise you can put here so that any code, any UI, API, database, any development that is done aligns to the context that you have given, right? Now, one of the simplest way to do, one of the other approaches, you can merge all the three or every context into one big single file, call it as project context.txt, and put everything in one place. It would still work. It would make it tough to manage over a period of time, but this is something that would help you to uh, build the pro build the application which is relevant and close to the customer need of the uh, developer, right? Now, with this context file generated, how do we use it, right? So when I go back to my GitHub Copilot, so whenever we are writing, can you generate a user story for create order requirement? So I'm just telling a random, give me a user story for a create order. So what it would do, right? And right now I'm just asking it to create something out of whatever it has access to and it is trained on. Right now I have this detailed requirement, right? So this is what, what is the shipping information, what is the payment information, what is the error handling. So I have all these things. Now this is very generic and very generic and very something that may not be applicable for the team or the project or customer you're working for. So what I would do, is, I could add the details of what my user story I would want it to have. Every user story to have definition of done. Refer to below existing user story to generate new user stories. So I'm basically telling the GitHub Copilot the context, what I want it to do. Now, remember the context file cannot be specific to your project, specific to user story. It should be generic enough for it to use it as a guiding principle or a guideline, right? So once I now save this, now this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the same, but while referring to user story guidelines in hash context. So I'm now asking you to refer to a particular file to generate me the output, right? Now it would try to generate the same user story, right? Now if you see the difference, now if you see we'll wait for it to be done, and we'll see how it comes out and compare the previous and the current, right? Now all I have done is given a context file, right? And I still haven't given it the existing user story information of the customer, of the very specific. If you include that, it will be much more relevant and detailed. So if you see here, it says, first time I said, can you generate me a user story? Yes, I can. And as a customer, I want to be able to do this. Acceptance criteria is this, it does that. But now once I said, can you generate me user story, while referring to the context file, now what do I have in the context file? I have very specific requirement of what needs to be done, right? Now, once I said that, if you see the output, now it says as a buyer, right? I want to be able to securely create an order view through HTTP service. So it has now added very specific, which is not the case here, right? So based on the context, based on my guiding principle, my guidelines, I was able to generate a very specific user story which is more detailed, and which manages the security part of it, which has a definition of done with specific requirement. So you could notice the difference where this user story is something you can give it to your team with minimal effort as compared to this. So that's the key difference here. With the context option what I've given, now this is a user story. Now I still haven't shown you the coding and the development side, right? So the idea is to implement this context in your project. Now similarly, when you as a when you develop when you're updating the user stories, you use the context file. Developers can refer to coding standards and technical standards file, and still generate the code in a similar way. So what we have seen is, in your project, how can you manage the context? And what I would recommend is use and manage this context and keep it up to date on every sprint. As part of a retrospective meeting, you should also look at what are the changes we need to do to the context file. How do we do that? So the idea is to look at these details and put up and maintain a context file on an ongoing basis for a project, which ultimately will help your company and your project and enterprises to be efficient and productive, right? So this is a way which I've seen working, and I was able to manage context for a project and deliver. Now, with this context given, now the idea is to go back and understand uh, the the 5W quickly. It's a recap. It's been few weeks that we talked about it, so I want to quickly recap the 5W. So 5W basically has five category of questions. We base for every user story, for every requirement, we ask these five questions. What are we trying to achieve here as a user story or as a feature? What are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? What are the benefits that customer gets or the end user gets? When is this getting triggered? When is the service getting triggered? When is the user story getting triggered? Or it could be your delivery timeline. It could be when is it expected for the market? When is the other competitors releasing this feature? So it could be anything which will help the 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 delivery team to generate user stories faster, generate code faster, generate test cases faster, and generate UAT scripts faster. So anything that we can do, we'll be able to do. Now, where is the destination of the source is what you want to cover. It could be your database, it could be a deployment architecture, it could be your networking, the access details, who is going to access when. So all these details is what we also cover as part of the where and when, right? And finally, the way. Way is where you're going to start asking questions or thinking around how do I implement this in my current project scope, in my current project details or specific details, how am I going to apply? Now, the 5W strategy I'm talking about doesn't only talk about only help developers, it helps everybody in the STLC team, right? So whether you're a project manager looking to define a new timeline, you are a scrum master looking to write user story, product owner looking to write a user story, scrum master who is trying to prioritize the user stories, developer is trying to write test code, and tester who is going to write test cases, right? So everybody can use this to generate, use the 5W strategy, use the context files to do their day-to-day work, right? So what are we going to do now is, now we have a basic understanding of 5W. How do I apply this in implementing my order service? So before that, let's quickly understand the problem statement or what are we trying to achieve in using 5W, right? So if I go back to my, so what are we going to do is, imagine there's a user, right? There's a user who is your visitor to the website, or any user coming to the website, and imagine they're accessing your systems through a customer portal, right? Any portal that you have, a website that you're building, and on top of it you're writing a order management service, right? So what are we going to build is, we're going to build an order service. Now, we're not going to focus much on the controller part today, because the idea is to focus on how do I write service and how do I write the new, prompts for the services. So the idea, and then we're going to write four services: the create order, and update order. We're going to add get order by ID and list the orders, right? So four APIs is the requirement to create. So what I'm going to basically just align this, right? So and then, so what I'm going to do is, yes, so this is the order services, and let's put them under one block. This is what we're going to build today, and all the APIs are then connected to a database, right? So what are we going to do is build a service which the user can connect through their system and then call the order service. The order service would internally have this order create, update, delete list feature, which then connects to a database and then returns back the data. So this is the, imagine this is the diagram that your, say, technical lead has given after the user story was discussed, detailed out, and you have defined these APIs for your project, for your work for next 2 weeks as part of a sprint. Now from there onwards, how do you take this up and how do you build these APIs using prompts, using code that is generated from GitHub Copilot? Now, before you write the prompts, the you could you could apply the 5W principles to build these prompts, which you can then apply in your project, right? So, how are you going to do? So the first part is, to start asking across your four APIs: create order, get order by ID, list order, update orders, right? Start asking these, thinking through these questions. Now, if you're an experienced developer, you would probably have these questions going on the flow. You already have them ready. You already are thinking through. So if you're thinking through, you could also note down the answers for those questions in one place, right? Now, because the answers for these questions goes in as a context, as an entry into a context or into a prompt, right? So what are the key properties to return in the order details? What are the mandatory parameters to create an order? what are the optional parameters, what are the requirements for pagination. When we say list orders, we cannot return hundreds and thousands of orders in one go. So what is the pagination requirements? What is the states that you want to return as part of the details, right? Now, answers to the some of the question, as I said, can go into context. Example, what are the states to be focused on? Now, the answer to that could be a context file where you say always return orders which are not cancelled, right? Because if we only want to work, we want the team to focus on orders which are active or new, right? So you can say you can have a context where it says only take care of order where states is new and not cancelled. Example, right? So we say pagination with list orders. You can pagination. You can say by default the page count is items per page is 10 unless specific unless overridden by the project context file. So you can mention those details. What are the sorting requirements? So you can ask these questions, note down or think or look at one way of looking at it. Some of these for some of these questions you may have the answers already as part of previous experience. You go to the context file, look at that, and then come back and use the prompts, write the prompts. Similarly, you're going to write the why part. Why is the buyer, why is the customer trying to create an order? Where is he trying to create? How are we trying to do? So the idea of the why question is to understand the scope and the very detailed requirements that the customer is looking for or the business is looking for, right? And then you go and ask the when part of it. When is the order service getting triggered? Now, if you're looking at a if you're working as a project manager, right, then the question is when is the order service getting going live, right? So where all these questions, depending on whether you're a developer, whether you're a project manager, scrum master, product owner, your questions will change. But you should know, you should have these when questions and then add that to the context so that you can go ahead and generate the user story, generate the requirement, generate the delivery timeline, anything you want through the Copilot. So when is the order getting service going live? When is the let it. So I can also say when is the order service deployment. So this here is where you ask everything around when this should happen, when it should connect to a database, how it has to connect. Similarly, you have your where questions. Where is the database? Where is the service getting deployed? Where is the specific table details located for the shipping details? Where is the tables for order details? Where is the table for the individual customer details or the merchant details? So these are the details of the questions that you ask, you figure out. And the whole exercise may take about 15 minutes for a requirement for a user story, especially in the beginning, but it may be faster as you apply, right? So where is the where part is focused on the data. Where is the data? Where are you going to get? And then details around that. Where is it deployed? Where is the access for that? Where is the security? What is the security aspects of accessing the data and all the details? And you can go at individual table level, individual field level, right? Now, finally, what is the approach to connect? What is the approach? uh, what are the ways you're going to implement these APIs? The approach to connect to a database. Do you need to use a service layer? What is the data layer? What is the security of the data layer? So you can ask all these questions and define your implementation approach, define your user story approach, define your delivery approach. So anything that you're going to ask, you can go ahead and apply these questions, apply these type of questions for your role, for your work you're trying to do, and get two outputs out of them. One is the context out of the questions, which could be an update to an existing context file. So your answers related to, if I go back here, so your answers related to order states, right? So, I can say, order always consider orders with state new and new and shipped, because maybe those which are shipped you want to ensure they're actually delivered, so your delivery team is focused on those which are shipped, and not and all the new are something that needs to be addressed or to be processed, so you want to focus on that. Similarly, always always sort by new status on top. So now these are not specific to a user story, right? These are not these are more like what you want. Anywhere somebody is writing an order related API, how do you want it to, one second, right? So always sort orders by new status on top, right? Always considers orders with the state new and shipped. So the idea is to specify the context, specify, never create a delete operation. So these are all the context that I can now copy. So let me make this into one single file, right? So this is one context which I've created, which I've updated based on my new user story, which is my create order, update order, delete order. Now I'm going to copy this, go back to my context file, go to the context file and update the context. So now I have the context related to user stories. I have some context related to security. I have some context related to database connectivity. How do I want to do? And some context related to the order. Now this is a, you can imagine this is an enterprise or a project level context. It's not specific to user stories, specific to your team, but it is a generic context file. Now here you have your coding standards, which is specific to the code that is getting generated, or any other technical that you want to cover. Now what we will do is use this context what we created by applying those 5 principles and answering these questions. We have the context, we have the updated context for based on this user story. Now let's generate the code using the prompts, right? So what I'm going to do is first go here and create a services folder. Now notice that this is something I have to do myself, right? So there is GitHub Copilot. Will you still have to do the details around order management, sorry, folder structure, creating the services and everything that you still have to do. But the idea would be to uh, generate the code using Copilot. So if I go here and create a new item, I'm going to create a class, order service CS. Now, in fact, let me create one interface first, right? Now, I have the interface file. Now, if I just look at my coding standards, so here is the interface file. If I go to the coding standards, they specifically, you use camel case for method name. So there is a very specific requirement or coding standards. Now, if I go here, generate interface definition for order service to include create, update, get by ID, and list orders contracts, and refer to context file and coding standards file. So I'm basically asking it to generate everything based on the context in my context file as well as follow the standards I've given in my standard. And my prompt is very specific, which I've given for the requirement. Now it would generate me the interface. So So what you notice here is I didn't ask you to generate the documentation. I didn't ask you to write any XML based generation. Right? I just asked you to generate the code. How did it understand it has to generate the XML document is using because of the standards and the specification that I have given. Right. So uh, you need to understand the importance of this context file, this particular file that you are referring in the prompt. That makes all the difference in the output. So now let me copy this and in fact I didn't even give the order service I order service. I just said generate an order service interface. Right. So here is the interface that was generated, which has update order, all the details. Now it gives me an error. So let me add one models and I'll again ask GitHub Copilot generate order model with properties of status, items list, and amount, order date as well. So again, I made a mistake. I didn't refer any of my coding files or I didn't do anything. But still, Copilot is now still generating based on the standard. So what again, me missing the referral is not a you know is intentional. Reason being, I wanted to show once you refer the context at the beginning, for that session it would keep on referring to that, right? That's the important stuff. You need not keep on telling attach refer to this file, refer to this file. Once you tell at the beginning of the file, beginning of the coding session, it would refer always, right? Which is a key aspect where you need not do it every time, right? So here I have my items, my order, which is amount and the status, right? Now there's a small mistake, right? My order state, the status is a string, right? So what I'm going to do now is go back to GitHub Copilot, right? Can you can you update hash order.cs uh, can you update to have status as enumerator of three statuses: status, new, cancel, ship. So now I'm asking you to update the existing code. Now you could use inline GitHub Copilot for this, but I'm regenerating the code. But now if you see here, it has updated the complete code and only replaced the order status with an enumerator called order status. So all I had to do was just ask it what exactly I need, and I was able to generate the updated uh, file, updated code, which now I can replace here, right? Now I have my order service. Let me add, right? So now I have my order model, order service. Let me go ahead and write one implementation class. So I'll delete this. Now going back to GitHub, implement I or I order service as per standards in hash coding standards and generate order service. Now I'm specifically telling what should be my class name, right? So it would go ahead, generate the code while implementing the order service, ensuring the coding, naming conventions, everything is there. Again, if you notice the details, the it has added a try catch block for every function, for every code. There's exception being added by default into the code. So all this is because of the one single context file, right? So if as long as a team you maintain and manage the context file, generating the code becomes uh, very simple and very easy and effective, right? Now I'm going to replace it here. You have the very specific order service. Now I have the list of orders. Let me add this, right? So I have my order service. It says something is not implemented. Yep. So maybe some function is missing. So let me delete it for now. Okay. So now this is my create order, update sync, and get by ID async, and then uh, list orders by status, right? Now there